Welcome to The Signal, the podcast companion to the only intelligence report in men's health and fitness that tells you what to watch, what to ignore, and why. I'm Andy Feltovich, founder and CEO. Every episode, we go deeper than the newsletter. Longer conversations, harder questions, and the stories behind the data. We don't do bro science, we don't do wellness theater, and we question everything except questioning. Every dogma on trial, guilty until proven innocent. If you're new here, The Signal is produced by Andy Feltovich, the flagship company of the Collegium of Order and Flow. Subscribe to the newsletter at the-signal.us. Don't forget the hyphen. And if this episode is worth 5 stars to you, leave a review. It's the single best thing that you can do to help us cut through the noise. Now let's get into it. Today we have Susan Hamrahi, a naturopathic doctor and scientific communications specialist at AstaReal Inc., the world's leading producer of natural astaxanthin. Susan has over 18 years of industry experience and oversees AstaReal's scientific education initiatives, including training, publications, and content development. She presents AstaReal's research at major conferences, including the International Society of Sports Nutrition, where I first met her. This is for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice. Welcome, Susan. It's great to have you today.
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm excited to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation.
We're excited to have you. So let's start off, as we always do, with your Batman, Batwoman origin story, as it were. How did you get to astaxanthin?
Well, sometimes the path chooses you, you don't choose the path. And it was one of those situations. I started practicing almost 20 years ago and practiced only a couple years and realized really quickly on that my passion was more so the educational side of it and working with people on how they actually can utilize nutrition and nutrients and the research available to us to better our health. So I jumped in and started doing supplements and worked for a company that was educating practitioners and loved it. It was primarily ophthalmology, so nutrition for your eyes, some cardiovascular work as well. And I transitioned from there to a medical food company where I actually met my now boss, Karen Hecht, who is our VP of Science. And Karen really is the one who turned me on to astaxanthin. At AstaReal, we utilize their nutrient in 2 of our medical food products. And I was hooked. Like, that was it. So that company actually was acquired by private equity. And when that happened, I thought, what do I want to do? What is my 100% best job ever?
Sounds like it was very fortunate for both of you. So that was your origin story. Let's talk about the curious origins of astaxanthin. So we have to remember that every supplement, somebody had to say, I wonder what happened if I ate this. And we were joking on the pre-call that all Scottish food was based on a dare. So tell us about astaxanthin and its origin story, as it were.
So astaxanthin, the discovery of it as a carotenoid is not new. It was actually in the 1800s. But really digging into astaxanthin started in the late 1980s by a scientist by the name of Akka Lingmill. He's a Swedish scientist, and he started researching salmon. And if you really think about it, Andy, I was thinking about that as we were prepping for this call, but salmon are the ultimate endurance athletes, right? They have these huge swims, these 900-mile journeys where they're jumping up 7-foot elevations to spawn, and they're doing it all without eating. And Dr. Lingmill started looking at how astaxanthin applies and is utilized to preserve their muscle stores and their energy stores in the salmon. And does that apply to humans? So he really started the research, and fast forward now almost 40 years, right? We've been researching for over 35 years with AstaReal astaxanthin. We were the pioneers that started looking at this. And it all started with that salmon journey. And it does, as you know, and as we'll look at some of the research today, it does translate to humans.
So let's talk about how we met, because I think it's instructive. So everybody in the audience who goes to ISSN every year knows I'm the guy in front asking all the pesky questions. And we had never met before. I saw your presentation on AstaReal astaxanthin, and I kind of rolled my eyes. I said, look, we've been down this road before. We every time we identify an antioxidant or a candidate antioxidant in food that does wonderful things, prevents cancer, all kinds of other oxidative stress. Then we try to isolate it and supplement it, and it either doesn't work or doesn't backfire. Most famous cases being vitamin E, beta carotene. Some of those trials actually had to be stopped because they were killing people, basically doing more harm than good. So that's all to say, when you gave your presentation, I gave a big eye roll and said, I don't believe you. I've been down this road before. I know how this story ends. So tell us, why am I wrong, and why is this time really different?
Great question. Astaxanthin structure, so its biochemical structure, if you think of a dumbbell, so think of a bar and then two ends, it looks kind of like a dumbbell where it is able to span the lipid bilayer. And the ends of it are lipophilic, so it can embed into the cell membrane. And the middle of it is hydrophilic, so it is able to function in water. And it spans that whole cell, and it's able to neutralize free radicals and ROS and scavenge. It's particularly good at scavenging singlet oxygen species in the cell. So it really is very different as vitamin E. It's lipid-based nutrient. Vitamin C is a water-based nutrient, but astaxanthin is able to utilize both ends and the middle to neutralize free radicals. So yes, while ROS is bad on some level, we need to have ROS because it signals, right? It helps to provide signaling for exercise adaptation. And it's a threshold to activate pathways like AMPK and PGC1 that are critical for mitochondrial and metabolic adaptation.
Okay. So it sounds like, if I'm following correctly, part of the reason that it's able to sidestep neutralizing good oxidative stress and target the bad oxidative stress. I know broad, simplistic categories, good and bad, is just the nature of the compound, fat versus oil, fat versus water-based, and also where it uniquely lives in the body, bridging the lipid bilayer in the mitochondria. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. And to be honest, we're still doing that research. While we've been researching astaxanthin for many, many years, decades, as I mentioned, and AstaReal, we are the pioneers of that research. So we have over 85 human clinical studies. We are still learning a lot of the mechanisms and the pathways that astaxanthin is impacting.
Okay. So speaking of the pathways that it's impacting, one of them very near and dear to me and my audience is muscle soreness and recovery. And this sounds like the astaxanthin was potentially able to thread the needle, helping a blunt delayed onset muscle soreness, while not impeding training adaptations. So tell us about that research.
Yes. So that research, Dr. Gavin Barker in 2023 started looking at 19 resistance trained athletes. They were men at 12 milligrams for 4 weeks. And what he found, they were looking specifically for delayed onset muscle soreness. They were doing leg presses, and they did leg presses to failure at 65, 70, and 75% of their maximum to specifically induce soreness. And what they found was the men on the astaxanthin supplementation reported 58% less delayed onset muscle soreness at 24 hours after exercise, and 32% less DOMS 48 hours after exercise. The interesting thing as well is they also looked at intensity. So they did a VAS soreness scale, and intensity of the soreness was 60% less at 24, 36, and 48 hours post-exercise. So quite significant, while there was no significant effect on DOMS soreness in the placebo group. And
Okay.
then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I appreciate you talking about effect size and magnitude. One of my pet peeves is p-value worship, and it's like, it was significant p-value of 0.001, 0.001 to the 27th power, and it's like, okay, that just tells me that something exists. It doesn't tell me about anything about effect size magnitude. So yeah, please proceed. It delayed not only the existence but also the intensity of DOMS.
Absolutely. And yes, it was statistically significant, but I agree
Yes.
with you. The real world application of it is, what did these athletes feel like? Yes, it delayed their soreness, but it also delayed their perception, their severity of soreness. And then Dr. Barker in 2026 and this is ahead of publication, although we do have permission to talk about it.
Okay.
He replicated this research in women. So he looked at 25 resistance trained women at 12 milligrams for 12 weeks, and he essentially replicated the study. And interesting, they also reported a 58% reduction in DOMS after 24 hours. But the really interesting effect was that they only showed a 29% reduction in intensity of soreness. So it kind of leads you to think there's different mechanisms or different pathways in women versus men. And I think more research needs to be done in this area in women athletes in addition to male athletes. But one of the hypotheses is that potentially women have a better ability to endure pain. So the pain threshold is higher in women. So potentially that is what the reduced VAS score showed in that regard.
Yeah, well, just anecdotally, have my experience working with both men and women. Yes, women tend to, who knows, maybe it's an evolutionary adaptation to childbirth, or maybe men just like to complain, which I'm guilty of that. So that's one data point in favor. So let's talk about a couple things. Two things. Let's get the easy one out of the way. So that's 12 milligrams for 4 weeks. So you're not going to pop this as in your pre-workout and expect to go to the gym and get results. 12 milligrams 4 weeks. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, which makes sense. It's lipid based. It takes a while to embed in the mitochondria and work its magic. So that would tend to make sense. Now the big question, the money ball. Yes, it blunted DOMS, but what about the training outcomes? Were there any differences in strength, hypertrophy, performance?
Yeah, there were not. So they did not show
Ding ding
any.
ding.
Exactly. In fact, there's a 2000, back as far as 2008, Malsum did a study in 40 healthy paramedic students at just 4 milligrams a day, but he doubled the time of the study. So instead of 12 weeks, it was actually 6 months. There were 20 in the treatment group, 20 in the placebo group, and what he found was, and it was squats. So how many squats can you do? And it was this question absolutely emphatically. And what he found in the treatment group, again at 4 milligrams, that group had a 55% increase in the number of reps that they were able to perform after treatment. So there is also other areas. We can look at cyclists as well. Cycling, the endurance athletes showed in some of the work there an increase in power output and
Okay.
a reduction in time in their cycling trials. So we're not seeing any impact on performance, yet we are seeing benefit for the ROS work and the resistance trained athletes for their delayed onset muscle soreness.
So all the great antioxidant taste and none of the calories. It sounds like. So we'll see what the catch is if there is one. Let's talk about. I'm glad you touched on. Not, and actually, I don't know if we had discussed the cycling research in our pre-call. I'm glad you brought it up. We did talk about the firefighters and their performance in endurance. So let's transition from DOMS to endurance in the firefighter studies, if you will. What did they find?
Yeah, sure. In the firefighter work, it was 12 milligrams. It was a crossover study also. What they were looking for it was actually Drew Gonzalez did the work in
Yeah.
2024. And
So actually, I'm going to interrupt you right now for real quick for 2 points. So one, yeah, Drew is great. That alone means something. He's one of the giants in the field. He's going to be really deadly when he's old enough to drive. If you ever see him, he looks like a teenager. Maybe that's just because of my age. Um, everybody looks that way. But so that's important. The other thing I was going to mention is the double-blind placebo crossover. Okay, yes, and for our folks in the audience, that is gold standard. So one of my pet peeves, if you see me rant on social media, is people inferring things into surveys and epidemiological data. Uh, uh, Controlled uh, double-blind placebo crossover means that the subjects do not know what they're getting, and each subject acts as its own control. So first round, one group gets the treatment, the other doesn't, and then I think there was a washout period. That's pretty much standard procedure. Yes, and then when after the washout period they switched, so control became experimental, experimental became control. So that is as much as we can in something as complex as the human body, because remember, we're not doing chemistry, we're not doing physics experiments. These are living human bodies, and we'll only ever be able to control so much. But that's as good as it gets. Random, double-blind, randomized control, double-blind, placebo crossover. Say that 10 times real fast. All right, now if I didn't totally derail you off your train of thought, Susan, please continue.
No, absolutely not. And you're right. Dr. Gonzalez, what a brilliant researcher and wonderful person. And he looked at 15 male firefighters in a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study at 12 milligrams, and they supplemented for 4 weeks. And they did two different batteries. They did a treadmill, so they looked at stress in that regard, so exercise control. And then they also did fireground testing. So they went through 9 different battery of exercises in a simulated fireground test, just like they would be in a fire. They were looking at several things. They were looking at interleukin 1B, so some inflammatory markers or some indicators of that stress post exercise and post fireground. They looked at cortisol levels and they looked at uric acid. And then they also looked at ventilatory threshold. So how long can these firefighters stay aerobic while they're fighting these fires or conducting, their exercise? I didn't know, and I learned this from Dr. Gonzalez, that firefighters, their number one, I'm going to ask you this, what do you think the number one cause of death in firefighters is?
Tragically, I think it's cardiovascular disease.
You're absolutely right. So Dr. Gonzalez really started looking at, like how can we help support their hearts, their cardiovascular health through supplementation. And what they found was the participant increased their ventilatory and aerobic threshold by 8.8% on the astaxanthin supplementation. And if you think 8.8% is not a lot, but it is. It is quite a good, it's a 7.1% percentage point increase. So it is quite significant to be able to prolong and to be able to provide that benefit that they can stay longer in an anaerobic functioning manner.
That's important. There's several things to unpack there, but let's just start there with staying aerobic for longer. Metabolic flexibility, the big social media buzzword, whether the progenitors, the purveyors understand it or not. So it sounds like is actually doing that though, using preferentially using the best energy substrate for the best purpose, right?
Yes, I mean, that's what all the research is pointing to. Of course, again, we're just kind of starting this research, so more needs to be done, but it does point, and there was other work done showing that astaxanthin, and think of the salmon, I guess, the salmon with all the astaxanthin in the muscle stores. Also, they were able to fuel their muscles without eating with this store of astaxanthin. So it potentially is also beneficial for us in that same way, where we are utilizing fat for energy instead of carbohydrate for energy, so we can stay longer in an anaerobic state because we're using our oxygen more efficiently.
So the other thing I'd like to unpack with the firefighter research is stress physiology. Dr. Roberts, as you know, ISSN every year does lots of great work on that, very relevant to tactical athletes and also my target niche, executives, entrepreneurs, senior professionals. So this isn't just treadmills in a sterile treadmills in a laboratory. That firefighter test, they put them under real stress, real suffocating equipment and gear, and real suffocating hot fires, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The fireground test was actually done in the training facility at the Bryant, Texas Fire Department, where they actually were in full gear, in full oxygen, doing their 9 different batteries of testing that they go through in their training regimens for fighting fires and saving lives during those fires.
Okay. So what if you'll venture an extrapolation, what do you think and then as you mentioned, they were able to significantly improve their performance. So what do you think are the implications for stress management, cortisol levels, possibly other implications?
So, well, that study did show that the interleukin 1B, so inflammatory markers and stress markers, the cortisol and uric acid, were all reduced in the astaxanthin group. It's hard to hypothesize, but again, knowing that astaxanthin is very, very efficient at scavenging ROS and the excess free radicals created, because as you well know, in mitochondria or energy production, one of those byproducts of energy production is free radical production
Yep.
and reactive oxygen species. So the fact that astaxanthin has this structure, that superpower structure, to be able to scavenge very, very efficiently, it just, if I'm connecting the dots, goes to say that yes, in your daily life, it is going to work efficiently for you, as it is the salmon, as it is the firefighters, to also help with that efficiency, if you will, in the mitochondria for your energy production and pulling off that oxidative stress.
What you're saying makes total sense. So I train a lot with Strong First under Pavel Tsatsouline, the man who largely credited for bringing kettlebells and Soviet training methods to the U.S. And the Soviets always historically took a very different approach than the U.S. So instead of this metabolic theater, this metabolic sweat till you drop theater, they focused on anaerobic threshold training, so increasing the amount of work you can do before you go anaerobic. And he's always preached, the Soviets always preached, that most of our oxidative stress comes from and is cured by our own mitochondria. So they always said, if you want to combat oxidative stress, bigger, better, stronger mitochondria, or it sounds like anything that aids the mitochondria in their function, including astaxanthin.
Absolutely. And astaxanthin has been shown also in research to support PGC1 alpha. PGC1 alpha is the biogenesis of mitochondria. So it's not just supporting the mitochondria that you have, it's also supporting the biogenesis of your mitochondria.
Okay. Lots of interesting implications for aerobic capacity, mitochondria, oxidative stress there. Let's talk a little bit about cognitive performance, because astaxanthin, the gift that keeps on giving, there's also been some findings that it might improve cognitive performance. So let's talk about that.
And again, that work, Andy, is something that we've got to do more of. And in us, that is something that we're very interested in for astaxanthin and looking at cognitive performance. Back in, I think it was 2012, Katagiri did some work, and they were looking at 31, actually it was 96 participants. Their mean age was about 56. 31 was in the treatment group and 29% was in, excuse me, I flip-flopped that. 31% was in the placebo and 29 was in the astaxanthin group. Again, 12 milligrams. And what they showed in that regard was that in the astaxanthin group, they showed 7% faster delayed recall, 7% faster working memory, 6% faster choice reaction time, and 8% faster multitasking. So interesting there that they were able to show that. Then in the women's study that we talked about a little bit, they are also looking at markers of cognitive performance in that regard, in task switching and reaction time. And again, that data is not published. It's not completely gone through, but I can report that there was a benefit in the task switching and the reaction time measurements there. I just don't have the final data. I don't want to provide anything that isn't 100% accurate.
I totally appreciate that. Your academic integrity is impeccable, so that is much to be lauded. Let's go back to your roots as in, I believe it was nutraceuticals with eyes. What do you think are the possible implications for visual function and astaxanthin? And and again, it's we're conjecturing here, and I think everybody's understands that, and we're clear about that. But what are your conjectures for how much of that task switching and performance due to reticular function, and how much to other means?
Yes, we don't know is the honest answer.
Okay.
In ophthalmology, it is super exciting though, because again, muscle, and I always go back to our most lauded endurance athlete, the salmon, and that astaxanthin is that mitochondrial or muscular nutrient. But we have muscles in our eyes. So muscles in our eyes that we know there is astaxanthin is in the ciliary muscles. So the ciliary muscles are responsible for accommodation. What that means is it's distant vision and near vision. So those muscles flatten out to see distance, and then they, start to round, or they tighten up to see nearer, so you can see near and far quite readily. And if you think about your eyes, we talked a little bit about cognition And astaxanthin can cross the blood-brain and the blood-retina barrier. So that is something else that makes it a little bit unique in other antioxidants. So the ciliary muscle is responsible for that accommodation. Well, think about our lives now in this digital age. We sit in front of a screen all day for hours and hours and hours. So if you're nourishing your muscles, you're nourishing your ciliary muscles because it's going throughout your body. You're going to have, and there is work that does show that it does alleviate symptoms of computer vision syndrome. So it is very different. I know that isn't answering your question about cognitive. Is it potentially the same? Again, we don't know that research, and we would suspect that it's different. But reaction time, certainly, if you see it quicker for the athlete that hits a ball or is golfing, or I'm a squash player, so I know that for me to see a ball quicker and react quicker, it is a little bit to my advantage. Yes, certainly a lot of applications for astaxanthin cognitively, but also from a muscular standpoint in the eye.
So one small correction about the ciliary muscles flexing and relaxing. They should flex and relax. If you're nearsighted like I am, then my ciliary muscles leave a little to be desired. But you bring up an interesting point about crossing the blood-brain barrier, and a new term that I just learned now, the blood-retinal barrier. So talk about if you would please, talk about the implications of being able to cross those barriers and how that makes uh, astaxanthin potentially unique among antioxidants.
So there are other carotenoids that cross the blood-retina barrier, like lutein and zeaxanthin, which are part of your macula. So you're kind of the movie screen of your eyes that helps you with crisp vision. We don't know if astaxanthin is in the retina. It has not been shown to be in the retina thus far, but we do know that it does impact the vasculature in the back of the eye. So a researcher by the name of Nagaki in 2005 looked at 36 subjects at 6 milligrams a day. It was a placebo-controlled study for 4 weeks. And what he found was the retina capillary blood flow increased 9 to 11%. So if you think about it, aging eyes or just nourishing eyes, again, nourishment has to be vascular. All of our nourishment comes, and our oxygen, right, to the muscles in the eye or the areas of the body necessary for nourishment, and also taking waste away. So it has this big implication in that regard. Sato in 2012, 20 subjects, about the average age of 38, also looked at 12 milligrams a day versus placebo for 4 weeks, and also showed the AstaReal group blood velocity at the macula. So blood rheology increased by 15%. So the fact that it is able to, we can connect those dots in helping circulation in the eye. Certainly circulation in the brain is a big subject. Again, I'm connecting the dots a little bit there. I don't have the research in that regard, but it does show benefit for vascular health.
So let's talk a little bit more about vascular health, and this is where I throw out the disclaimer again. I did it at the top of the show, but always bears repeating. We're not trying to diagnose and treat disease. Don't call up RFK Jr. and report us. But want to talk about mechanisms, because this is potentially critical for cardiovascular disease and also has implications for all the other things we're talking about, endurance. So let's talk about the vasodilator, nitric oxide, astaxanthin's potential nitric oxide preserving functions and the implications for arterial compliance and cardiovascular disease.
Yes, so that work needs to be done too and mature. If, again, we connect the dots and think about how the body functions, nitric oxide is the parent to RNS, or reactive nitrogen species, like ROS, reactive oxygen species. And RNS also has benefit, but it also has implications if there's too much, like ROS. And because astaxanthin is such a efficient scavenger of singlet oxygen and ROS, it potentially also plays a role for nitric oxide to help support that, because nitric oxide has, as you mentioned, a bearing on your epithelium, which is the lining of your vasculature, to keep that healthy. And our capillaries, which are our very thinnest, veins and source of blood, have that lining. And astaxanthin has been shown to help with that ROS scavenging. Therefore, the downstream effect would be keeping or preserving, if you will, utilize, I don't know if I want to use that word regulatory wise, but I guess preserving is a good way, or maintaining nitric oxide bioavailability, because astaxanthin has reduced the superoxide and the lipid perioxidation.
Okay, and I
That's
learned
a big, sorry, Andy, and that's a big circle of connecting the dots.
which is why we have you, because that's what you do. You connect the dots. I learned something new today. Reactive nitrogen species, that hasn't been on my radar. Could you just elaborate on that briefly, please?
That is such a complicated pathway, other than to say nitric oxide is kind of the parent to that, like oxygen is the parent to reactive oxygen species. And nitric oxide is neutralized by superoxides. And then RNS is part of that whole pathway that, again, the balance of healthy nitric oxide and suppression of nitric oxide by RNS.
Okay, so let's tie it back to the aerobic and the endurance improvements that we saw. And I'm going to ask you to. You're doing such a great job. Of connecting dots. I'm going to ask you to connect some more. One of my theories for performance is, so aerobic performance. Think of it like a linear assembly line. Oxygen comes in top of stream, and out the other end comes water and CO2, and a bunch of magic happens in the interim. And it's any bottleneck is going to slow things down. And one of those potential bottlenecks is that the when you start undergoing a vigorous activity, it takes a second for the blood to get to the cells. It's not just like a magic switch you flip on and off, especially since you need to dilate those capillaries and get the blood to the cells where they can work their magic. So I'm going to ask you to connect some other big dots, and if you can do this, it'll be pretty impressive, because you'll have solved most of the problems in science
Pressure.
in science and exercise physiology. Do you think, in addition to the antioxidative effects in the mitochondria, that the arterial compliance could play a role in the increased endurance that you saw?
Well, it's certainly plausible, right? Just again, if we talk about how the body functions, as you mentioned, we have seen in research, I'm going to go to the cycling studies for a minute, the endurance athletes. Brown did a study in 2020 where they looked at 12 recreationally active, or 12 recreational cyclists. They took 12 milligrams for just 1 week. And after that 1 week, their fat ox was greater between the 39th and the 40th kilometer. So they were clocking these athletes doing 40-kilometer rides, and they were able to utilize their fat ox, or their fat for energy, in a much more longer way than the non-supplemented cyclists, where they went into a glycose store, or carbohydrate, in that 39th to 40th kilometer. And then also, Wicca did a 2023 study in 19 overweight men and women. They were put on a treadmill, and again, looking at how they're utilizing their energy and their energy use at 12 milligrams a day for 4 weeks. And it was kind of a broad range of cohorts. It was 18 to 45, so anywhere in there. And the astaxanthin group decreased their carbohydrate oxidation by about 8%. And during the exercise after 4 weeks versus baseline, it decreased their exercising heart rate by approximately 7%. So it kind of set up your question quite perfectly to answer. Yes, I mean, the answer is more cardiometabolic research needs to be done. But from what we're looking at and what they are looking at, it does point to having quite a beneficial cardiometabolic benefit. Dr. Waldman also did some work in 2023 looking at 12 milligrams for 4 weeks in resistant trained men. And he showed that their resting systolic pressure was lowered by about 7%. Their insulin values were lowered by about 24%, and their oxygen consumption lowered by 12% during the final and hardest stage of their exercise output. So it certainly points to that. I do feel like it's my responsibility to say more research needs to be
Sure.
done. But yes.
That's interesting, and I think a lot more, not just research, but focus needs to be on arterial compliance, not just from the standpoint of cardiovascular disease, because as we all know, the If there's not arterial compliance, then blood pressure can damage the endothelium, create inflammation, heart disease, blah, blah, blah. But from a performance standpoint, we always talk about mitochondrial biogenesis and angiogenesis, but I think arterial compliance is a great big unturned stone because, like I said, is those and the capillaries, people don't, unless you look at it under a microscope, they don't fully appreciate just how small those damn things are. I mean, we're talking about sometimes those guys, those red blood cells have to file through their single file. So we're talking about small vessels, and if you can't dilate them, you can't get the oxygen to the muscles, and then that's when you go anaerobic, and that's where you create the oxidative stress. So, and of course, take the performance hit because you've got to go anaerobic. So I think that's more science needs to be done all around. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and you reminded me also of something that we don't think about, but it's also not static. Like capillary, your capillaries aren't static. They are, it's a move it or a, what is it, move it or lose it? Use it or lose it? It's a use it or lose it scenario, right? So as we age and we become more sedentary, I think it's especially important to be able to continue to stay active. So if we're supplementing with astaxanthin and we're continuing to stay active and we have less DOMS and we have better energy efficiency through mitochondria, healthy mitochondria, then we're also supporting our capillaries and our vasculature and our heart muscle and our brains. It just is a huge homeostatic benefit in that regard.
As the song goes, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone's connected to the hip bone, all one big happy system. Let's shift gears and talk about your product integrity and third-party testing. So now that I do this professionally, when I'm actually going to point to a product and tell people to use it, I need to know that it's safe. And Astaxanthin, done a lot of work with product integrity, third-party testing. Tell us about that work.
So we do. We are True Shield certified, which is through Eagle Diagnostics. That is a third-party lab that provides testing for the WADA, and has over, looks at more than 400 plus banned substances. In that regard, our soft gels are 4 milligram or 6 milligram, and our 12 milligram soft gels are True Shield certified. But before it gets to that point, we are looking at our astaxanthin on a daily basis. So we grow our astaxanthin inside. It's completely done in a controlled environment in photobioreactors. Astaxanthin, as we mentioned earlier, is from microalgae. So it can be raised outdoor in ponds, but it's very exposed to potential contamination in that regard. So we grow it indoors in an enclosed environment that is tested. I don't know how many times a day, but it is tested constantly during the process of growing the astaxanthin. And then, of course, when the batch is done, it is also third-party tested outside of AstaReal to ensure its safety and efficacy and purity in that regard.
Okay, let's hit on that for a second, the origin. So the indoor-outdoor distinction, I hadn't thought about that, so I'm glad that you brought it up. Let's also talk about some of the other sources of astaxanthin. So obviously algae is that's how it's found in nature. That's how it's made at AstaReal. Can you tell us about some of the other sources and potential efficacy of other ways to derive the efficacy of astaxanthin derived from other sources?
So there are other forms of astaxanthin. There's a synthetic version. There is a yeast version, Fafia, and there's also a bacterial version. Research has looked at all three of those versions side to side, if you will, and what they showed was natural astaxanthin was 20 to 60% higher in its ability to be utilized and be bioavailable to the body than the synthetic version. And I'll tell you the difference from my understanding, which is very elementary, as I'm not a PhD, I'm an ND, but my understanding is that the synthetic form, in addition to the yeast form and also the bacterial form, it's a crystalline form. So what that means is it's very dense. So it's very compacted, if you will. So once it gets into the gut has to break everything down and utilize it. It's very hard to break down in the gut in not a natural form. So the natural form is much more conducive to our bodies. I jokingly said this to a colleague recently, we're programmed to receive nutrients the way we're programmed to receive nutrients. And that is true, even in our supplementation. And you touched upon it a little bit earlier, saying when we start taking specific components of a nutrient out, sometimes we get unintended consequences. And I feel like in a different version of astaxanthin, they are seeing that is not as bioavailable because we're just not recognizing it like we do a natural source
Yeah,
of astaxanthin.
it's like a play on the John Mellencamp song, "When I fight evolution, evolution always wins." It's why does natural work better? I don't know. It just does. Like so, Carlene Stark, she gonna be our guest next episode. She found that egg when you, even after controlling for essential amino acids, whole eggs outperform egg whites. Whole milk outperforms skim milk. Why? I don't know. It just does. We co-evolved that way, and we'll probably never unravel all of the inner mysteries. And the time we have remaining, we could go on all day. This is an absolutely fascinating discussion, but I want to touch on astaxanthin, the recognition by the International Society of Sports Nutrition, ISSN, their recognition of astaxanthin in their position papers. And just to tee this up for folks at home who might not be familiar, the ISSN position stands, they're kind of gold standard. By the time they roll around, there's usually been hundreds of randomized control studies, and there's definitive things that they can say about it. So we joked in the pre-call that that's kind of like in the mafia becoming a made man. Once you get in the ISSN's position stand papers, you're kind of golden and untouchable. So tell us about astaxanthin's recognition there.
We are very excited to have the ISSN rating as a moderate value for an antioxidant, and it is, as we mentioned earlier, there is more research to be done, but to be listed along with tart cherry and other antioxidants as in the ISSN position statement is truly an indication of all the research that has been done. And there is extensive research, not only in vitro, but also in humans that support astaxanthin as we've talked about all day today, its powerful superpower of an antioxidant.
We're coming up on time, so we're going to jump into the lightning round. What's the most overrated health and performance trend that you'd like to see go away or at least stop hearing about?
Yeah, I thought about this as you sent me my pre-work, and I don't know. I kind of became a blank on that one, but I do want to answer that question by saying that what I do want to hear more of is personalized nutrition. I want to hear more because while we're all the same, we're not all the same. And I love the research and the data, especially, ISSN has quite a bit of data looking at some of the, the wearables, being able to look at people in an individualistic way and create programs around that aspect. So that's my number one answer.
Well, that would, we're each an experiment of sample size n equals 1. So yes, absolutely anything that we could do to personalize would probably be a step in the right direction. And for the listener who wants to follow your work or stay current on the research and AstaReal and all the exciting stuff they're doing, where should they go?
So there's two websites. There's one which is AstaRealUSA.com. And please go on. At the bottom, you'll see where you can subscribe to our newsletter. I do a blog there every month as well, but you can also subscribe to the newsletter and stay up to date on all the research and all the happenings that are astaxanthin and AstaReal specific. We also have a site called astaxanthin.net. And it's more of a consumer-friendly site. You can also go there. Our brand partners are listed by product. If you'd like to start taking astaxanthin, it shows you products, not only human, but pets as well. Horses, dogs, cats are out there that have products developed with our brand of astaxanthin that you can connect through for them as well.
Well, I'll definitely have to get my tuxedo cat Buddy on
Yes.
him. I post something on Instagram. It's crickets. I post a reel of Buddy and 200 likes like that. Well, Susan, it's been a great honor to have you today, and discussion was very helpful, very informative for this very potentially impactful product. So I'd like to thank you again for your time and to look forward to having you again.
Well, it was my great pleasure, Andy. Thank you so very much for having me today.